the plants, the animals, the critters, the fungi, the bacteria, all sorts of things come together to make an ecosystem. And ecosystems are very varied. We mentioned that when we were here on Tuesday talking about the diversity that exists in an ecosystem. Yeah, Tyler.
That's something I've been wondering for a while. Is dirt considered organic?
Well, why wouldn't it be?
I don't know. It doesn't seem to be very alive, but I know it is.
Oh, that's a major misconception on your part. It's one of the most alive things that you experience.
Right.
It's full of bacteria. It's full of microorganisms. It's full of larger organisms. Dirt is very much alive, unless it has been sterilized. Now, in a normal greenhouse production, it is normal if they are using dirt, true dirt, as a media, which is rarely done anymore. But back when I was in college, they used just soil or dirt as a growing media in the greenhouse, because at that time a lot of this artificial components, vermiculite, perlite, and things of that type had not come into usage. So they would bring dirt, just hoppers full of dirt, and put it in a big, for lack of a better way to describe it, a big bin. But they would heat that up, and I don't remember, seems to me like it went to about 185 degrees.
Sterilize the living organisms.
To sterilize that, which would take out the bacteria and the fungus and so forth, so they could use that as a growing media in the greenhouse. Because if they didn't do that, they'd have all the weed seeds and all the other stuff going in there, which would be potentially a detriment to that growing situation. And a lot of the work that was going on in Tech's greenhouse at that time was research-based. And they were doing research on floral crops, a little bit on veg crops, and they were doing quite a bit on horticultural crops. And they didn't need to have another factor injected into that research project. So they, wanted a uniform, stable environment for which those plants to survive. So yes, that is the one exception to dirt being alive.
Okay. Aside from that, it's inorganic.
No, it's organic. There's a lot of organic stuff in it. Humus, organic matter. You know what organic matter is? What's organic matter?
Organic matter is anything that, if I remember correctly, has either hydrogen, nitrogen, or carbon in it.
Yeah, and it's usually a result of the decay or breakdown of a plant product and or an animal product, which are made up of those elements that you talked about. But soils vary greatly in their percentage of organic matter. Sand and some of these more harsh type soil components have very low organic matter. Soils that are in grasslands or have been just mowed, and we used to have an apple orchard. We mowed it, and didn't crop it. And we had a real high organic matter in that basically clay soil that we had. So organic matter is something that is essential. It's a primary component. And if you don't have organic matter in a soil, it's hard to work. It doesn't hold moisture. It's generally not a very desirable soil. So that's one of the criteria that we talk about when we are evaluating soils, is percentage of organic matter.
All right.
So what you're talking about are all components of the ecosystem that we're talking about. Soil is a major component of it, and they vary from region to region, and even spots in a field will vary with a type of soil, dependent upon the way that the field has evolved. And we'll talk about that more as we move through this. But your questions are good. That's fine. Ecosystems. Somebody's got a mic open or sound like they're snoring. I don't know what it is.
They're working on something on in the Keysville classroom, the network services, trying to straighten out that camera issue, so he should be done.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. It just, I was going to give somebody credit for really being asleep and snoring, but that's okay.
Actually, it looks like he just muted the microphone because of that.
All right. Not a problem.
It's even better Darth Vader walkthrough.
Yeah, that'll work. Not quite as bad as when they're mowing outside our window here, so I know what it's like.
Yeah.
But ecosystems exist all over the world, in every area, and they're varied. An ecosystem in a farm situation is greatly different than an ecosystem in a greenhouse, but they both are ecosystems. And the differences are things that we have to live and work with. Most of the organisms in an ecosystem are very small, and they are components of what we work with as we move along. And Tyler's comments about the organic matter and soils fall right into this discussion. We got great variations in what we call cultivated ecosystems, and they vary greatly across our service region. The types of cultivation, as we talked about on Tuesday, that exist in the Southside area are different than what we have here, and even more different than what exists in Southwest Virginia. So the term cultivated, has different connotations. But as we talk about cultivation, we talk about organisms and interactions that sustain a neutral ecosystem. Some of them are absent, some of them have been heavily modified. Nutrients are added to an ecosystem to promote crop growth. And sometimes chemicals are added to an ecosystem to depress disease. Great differences in nutrition and chemical applications depend totally on the crop that we're talking about and the type of cultivation. There's been some discussion about organic production. Organic production is still going to have an application of nutrients. How many of you are familiar with what we talked about when we talk about organic production? Anybody got any idea what we're talking about with organic production?
The thing to produce, that the end result is producing organic materials.
Well, I'm thinking primarily of if you go to the grocery store and you want to buy a bag of organic carrots.
All natural.
And organic tomatoes.
They haven't been sprayed with anything.
Well, that's the presumption of the public that they haven't been sprayed with anything. But those of us that are heavily involved in agriculture know that it's essentially impossible to produce a crop if you don't take some action to reduce disease and insects. And generally that means that you're going to spray something. But the term organic means that it's going to be the something that you spray is of a naturally occurring agent. We talked a little bit about nicotine the other day. Nicotine is a naturally occurring product that's produced in tobacco, but nicotine sulfate is that product, and it is a chemical that can be extracted and can be used as an insecticide and still have that tomato or bean or broccoli successfully be referred to as organic, because the application of that material was of an organic nature.
It wasn't manufactured.
It was not a manufactured chemical. It may have been transitioned in its state to make it applicable so you could spray it. Sulfur, the application of sulfur. Sulfur, a naturally occurring chemical or product, can be mined and ground and finely ground and then sprayed on a grape, for example, to deter powdery mildew. Mildew is a detrimental disease to grapes. I've got a lilac bush in the front of my yard, front of the house, that's just eaten up with powdery mildew. I haven't sprayed it, but I could have used elemental sulfur, 90% ground sulfur, and sprayed that and kept that mildew off. And had it still be referred to as an organic product. There's an awful lot of things being shifted to organic production because of that. Because we're dealing with a population of folks that want to have fruits and vegetables that are free of man-made chemicals. They've still been sprayed, but they've been sprayed with an organic material. I got a friend that I've been buying tomatoes from the last couple of weeks that's growing organic tomatoes and organic pepper. Beautiful pepper, but he's spraying it with materials that are naturally occurring that still qualify as to be construed as organic. So, this is a type of crop production that we're going to see more and more of. The science is improving that. There's a lot of chemicals in the mill at this point that will still be construed as organic because of the mechanism in which they're provided. One of the best fungicides that now exists for use on grapes is the product of a fermentation where they harvest the mold on top of the fermented product and they refine it, a high-end fungicide. And the fungicide, and I don't remember the exact rates on it right now, depends upon the crop, but you're only spraying 2 to 3 ounces per acre of the active ingredient. And it's a product of a mold, which means, again, it will qualify as an organic type of material.
You said 2 to 3 ounces per acre?
Yes, sir. I used an insecticide last night at a rate of 4 liquid ounces per acre.
Was this mixed into something?
Mixed into the 4 ounces I put in 400 gallons of water.
Oh, okay.
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 Yeah, you couldn't apply it.
I was about to say, how?
But think about a material that is effective against insects when you're only putting 4 ounces in 200 gallons of water and spreading that over an acre of foliage.
That's crazy.
Maybe crazy, but it's effective. That's the element of the science that's involved in doing that. So, all right, as we talk about ecosystems and trying to get back on track here a little bit, plants need some things in order to grow. I'm talking about generally green production type plants. They need light, they need water, and they need nutrients to be able to grow and thrive. And if any one of those elements is limiting, it's going to reduce the growth and the growth rate of those green plants. Now, I'm talking about specifically green plants when we're talking about that, because we've got some other plants that may not have chlorophyll and they require a little different stuff. But many of the plants require pollinators or dispersal agents to reproduce. We're in a situation now where our bee populations are really struggling because of one reason or another. There have been some diseases and some insects that have actually affected the bees and reduced the populations. I'll pose a question to any of you. How much of our food is dependent on a bee or an insect for pollination?
At least 40.
Really big percentage.
A little bit louder.
Maybe a quarter.
A lot more than a quarter. It's going to be more than 3/4. The majority of it is going to be dependent upon a pollination process of some sort. All of your tomatoes, all of your fruits and vegetables are dependent upon some sort of pollination, a transfer of pollen to in a flower to begin to grow a tomato or an apple or a peach or a plum or whatever. Now, I said a dispersal agent to reproduce. There are some fruits, grapes, for example, don't require cross-pollination, but they still have to be pollinated. And you're not familiar with, or you may or may not be familiar with how a grape flower looks. Until I got into the production of grapes, I never even thought about them flowering, but they do. And wind is the dispersal agent that we have for the pollen transfer in grapes. How many of you have any knowledge of production of corn, whether it be field corn or sweet corn? You know anything about the pollination of corn? What happens there?
That's also wind pollination, isn't it?
It's also wind and or gravity. The pollen is produced in the tassel of the corn, and the receptor is the silk that comes on the end of the actual ear of corn. And it's the type of thing that people tend to ignore. If you're not into agriculture, you don't pay any attention to that. But I had a friend a couple of years ago that was trying to grow sweet corn, and he had a major deer problem. And as the silks began to come out on his corn, the deer would go through and graze those silks off. Nearly every night they'd go through and whack those silks back. And when his corn began to mature, he had very few kernels of corn on the individual ears. And we got to talk about it. He said, "What's happened? What's the matter with my corn?" And we got to talk about it. I said, "The deer grazed off the receptor or the silks, and they didn't have an opportunity to pollinate. Every night when the silks would grow out, the deer would go through and whack them off. They're sweet, they're tacky, they've got a little sticky nature to them, and that's why the pollen adheres to them. And then when that pollen hits on that silk, it begins to grow. There's at least one silk coming out of the end of that ear of corn for every grain of corn that there is on that ear."
So is that how deer can be considered pests?
That's one of the many ways that deer can be considered pests. But yeah, that's a specific way. So it's we don't think of that as being a major component, but yet that was an impediment to the pollination of that corn. And there again, that pollen transfer is done primarily by wind and or gravity. If pollen will fall down, or if the agronomist recommend, or horticulturist, if you're planting corn for your home use, is it recommended to plant one single row or 3 short rows?
3 short rows.
3 short rows, right, because of this pollinating factor. One single row, the pollen doesn't have an opportunity to switch from one row to the other. If you've got 3 short rows, the pollen can transfer. It gives it an opportunity to wind to switch back and forth. All right, if you plant that 3 short rows, and you plant a row of yellow corn, a row of white corn, and a row of yellow corn, what color is the corn going to be when you harvest it?
Probably yellow.
Do what?
Combination.
I couldn't hear you.
Is it going to be a combination?
It will be. It will be. That's how initially we came with what we call bicolor corn. It'll have the color of both of them. So, it's simple things that we take for granted have a major influence on our plants and plant production within a given ecosystem. In that situation, the garden or that little plot of corn you had was a very defined ecosystem. I'm going to skip over a few of these things. One of the word terms that is used in one of these next couple of slides is called a niche. Somebody define for me a niche.
Oh, niche.
A little bit
Did
like.
anybody just,
I don't want to give my names, but
A
a
specific,
niche? Go ahead.
a specific slot in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a good definition. Yeah, it's a little corner or just a unique little area where something exists. Quite often we hear of different things may be an impediment for somebody building a road because of they found a small lizard or a little salamander or something that existed in wetlands and that was growing in a niche. And because of our environmental regulations and so forth, that little critter in that particular situation would create a problem in the construction of a given road or a building. So, you know, that particular thing that was in that little niche. So yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Is that why a lot of production down in Mexico was stopped after, well, not production, but construction was stopped in a lot of, I guess you'd say swampy areas when they discovered the axle ball back in the 80s?
You said Mexico?
I think it was Mexico. It was either Mexico or somewhere in South America.
Don't know about that because of they exist under different regulations and what. If it were in this country, yes, I'm sure it would be. You know, there's a lot of things that have caused problems with that, and they've gone to defining wetlands, which again are a niche or an ecosystem.
Because you were going to find that, except in that one odd spot.
Yeah. So you know that's an example of what we're talking about with an ecosystem. Usually they're healthy, naturally occurring areas, and they're so varied. We talked about Alaska the other day, and you know we're talking about now the things that have happened in Houston and in Louisiana this week have changed their ecosystem, dramatically changed. But that's a naturally occurring thing, and we don't know yet what's going to happen to that particular area of the country when this water subsides, because it's put sediment, sand, and silt in areas that had not been there before. So it's changed that ecosystem because of the invasion of the water. Crop ecosystems, we've talked already about a little bit, but they vary greatly with the type of crop production we're talking about. And one of the things that agricultural producers are doing now is trying to adjust the ecosystems in which they're growing crops to reduce weed populations by manipulation of crops. A crop rotation of soybeans, wheat, and corn helps to naturally control the weed populations. The wheat has got a naturally occurring chemical in the straw and the residual plant material that reduces the populations of certain weeds. So as the crops that are planted behind it come about, they don't have to deal with as much or as great a weed population. So it's another mechanism that we use as we adjust our cropping systems, which again adjust the ecosystem. All right, one of the components of an ecosystem, and it depends on the type of system we're talking about, are parasites. Parasites are organisms that derive their nutrition by living in or on tissues of another organism. Now, parasites differ from herbivores because they can cause disease rather than simply eating through the tissue. A herbivore is an organism that eats only plants, because when we're talking, you use this term to define itself. Herbaceous, so it's a plant-eating organism, where a parasite derives its nutrition from that particular organism. Plant parasites can be of many types: viruses, bacteria, and fungi. And it's plant parasites are a major thing that we have to deal with in successful crop production.
Is kudzu considered a plant parasite?
No, it wouldn't be considered a plant parasite. Did you all hear Tyler's question?
No, can you say that one again?
I asked if kudzu is considered a plant parasite.
It's not a parasite. It's just a very aggressive plant. I have watched it grow as much as 12 or 14 inches in a given day.
What?
Hmm?
How?
It will do it in right conditions. I've seen it'll grow that much. It has the reputation of being the vine that ate the South.
I can believe it.
That's through the produce market that I've got, we occasionally get access to kudzu blossom jelly, and it is a jelly, or like strawberry jam, blackberry jam. It's a product that's made from the nectar that's in the kudzu blossom, and on the label of that kudzu jelly it says the vine that ate the South. But it's a problem. Why do we have kudzu here? Anybody got any idea why we have kudzu? It's not native to this area.
Was it brought here to kill something?
Not to kill something.
Didn't they bring it to stop erosion?
Exactly. They brought it in. I think it came into Georgia when they had the road banks that they were dealing with. I think that the highway department brought it in with the idea that they could put it on the road banks and prevent the erosion where the banks had been cut down. And it will do that, but it also will take over the road if they're not careful. But that's one of the things that we have to do.
Has anything been found that can permanently kill it?
Oh yeah, a lot of things. We won't get in. We'll talk about that one in the chemical class. But it is killable. It takes some application. So. How many of you know what a lichen is? L-I-C-H-E-N.
It's a organism that exists because of symbiosis between a fungus and an algae. Exactly.
You're reading from the definition in the PowerPoint, but that's exactly what it is. And if you're observant, you'll see lichens on tree trunks and roots and rocks and things of that type. Quite often, if you in our area, if you walk along any of the little small stream beds, you'll see a rock that's got the lichen growing on it. It looks sort of a grayish type growth, and it's there between the symbiosis. What's the definition of symbiosis?
Two creatures existing upon one another for sustenance and other benefits.
Yes, that's good. All right, as we talk about symbiosis, what about rhizobacter? Rhizobacter. I'm horrible with some of these pronunciations, but that's a bacteria that is prominent on a lot, or not a lot, but certain species of plants that enable the plant to take nitrogen from the air and deposit it on roots of those plants. And it's a key component in the crop rotation that exists in Southside. Not as much here, but it is used here too. and it's prominent on what we call the family of plants to which beans and peas belong. Alfalfa is also a nitrogen-fixing plant. The nodules of roots on those contain high amounts of nitrogen. And what I was talking about with the crop rotation in Southside, they grow a lot of soybeans. And they'll follow a crop of soybeans with a crop of corn. The soybean puts nitrogen into the soil. The next crop of corn will use that nitrogen and thereby reduce the volume of fertilizer that has to be applied to that to produce a good crop. So, that's a symbiotic relationship between the plant and that bacteria that produces that nitrogen in the soil. Okay. There's any of the members of the legume family, anything that's considered a legume. Soybeans, our garden peas, beans of that type. Alfalfa is a legume. Give me one more that's
Green.
not grown commercially in our area, but it is down east and south side. What was that?
So green beans would be a legume too, right?
Green bean is, yep. A peanut is a legume. You wouldn't think of it, but it is. It's a legume. So, all right, we're going to talk a little bit more about another group of plants that exist in our ecosystem, and they're called saprophytes. And they live off of dead plant and animal material, either at or below the soil surface. They digest dead plant material.
So like mushrooms.
Excuse me?
So like mushrooms and fungi and moss.
Yeah. Do you know anything about mushroom production commercially?
Not commercial.
Not commercial? Okay. Depends a little on the type of mushroom that you're growing. We had one guy in our classes several years ago that was growing a variety of mushroom called shiitake, and he was buying logs out of Pennsylvania. Excuse me. It was a particular type of oak log that had begun to decay, and they would drill holes in those logs and inoculate them with the shiitake mushroom, and then they would ship them down to him, and he was somewhere around Bugs Island, the lower end of the lake, and he was wanting to develop a business of selling shiitake mushrooms. And he came to the realization where he was located, he was having a real problem doing that. He could grow the mushroom without any problem, but the marketing of them was an issue. He couldn't get full value for them unless he took them to a farmer's market up in Richmond. He was wanting to sell them for, I don't remember, $7 or $8 a pound. And shiitakes are highly desired by upscale restaurants. They're not really used by homeowners much, but mushrooms are a desired commodity. Initially, when I asked you the question, you knew anything about the production of mushrooms. The majority of mushrooms in the east are grown in an area around Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, which is in the Philadelphia area, just south of there. And they've grown in little short cave-type buildings. Kind of reminds me of a chicken house, except it's much smaller and sort of dug back into the hillside. Got usually their cinder block and have a low roof on them, and they do that to maintain the environmental conditions. They want it to be damp and dark and with high humidity. And this is where a lot of the white button mushrooms and some of the other brown cap type mushrooms are grown, the portobellas. But they will fill those little houses with high levels of highly organic material that they salvage from horse farms up there, and they will put that in there and dampen it and then inoculate it with the spores of the mushrooms, and they'll harvest those for an extended period of time. There's a saying about growing mushrooms. I don't, maybe a little bit crude for the class. I probably won't go there, but most of you know where I'm going with that, I expect. But mushroom. How many of you like mushrooms? Do you eat mushrooms? One. Anybody else? Put them on your pizza or in your spaghetti sauce?
Anybody,
Yes.
anybody in Keysville, talk for a second so then they can see you waving your hands. Apparently Keysville doesn't like mushrooms.
That's okay. It's sort of an acquired taste, but they're not highly flavored. I think they add a lot to beef stew and things of that type. So anyway, but they are saprophytes. They consume dead plant tissue and animal tissue, and are another component of ecosystems. And the production of mushrooms, like I was talking about in Kennett Square, they create an artificial ecosystem that is advantageous to the production of the mushroom. And mushrooms are a highly valued crop if you are in the produce industry. They're very perishable, but they are they add a lot to particularly certain types of dishes and so forth. As we begin this discussion of ecosystems, we come up with the term biome. And when I was in school, we never even talked, the term biome didn't exist. So this is something that's come about in the last 40 years. But a biome is a collection of ecosystems with similar climate, soil, and plant compositions, plant populations. And we have a tremendous diversity in the biomes that exist worldwide. And we're going to spend some time talking about that probably next week, talking about the diversity of the biomes that exist. But generally, I'd say that through our service area, from south side to Patrick Henry to southwest, we are generally in a similar type of biome. We have similar climate, similar soil, and similar plant compositions, although there are distinct differences.
Chatham is a very weird one.
What?
I said Chatham is a very weird one.
Well, Chatham's not that weird. It's you may feel like it's weird, but it's not.
Oh, it's actually, I say that because I found this out back when I was in high school. It's actually classified as a subtropical area.
Well, we all are.
Really?
Everything, yeah, in this area is subtropical. It's not tropical. It's something less than tropical. It's cooler. But there are plants that exist in Southside that we don't have here. An example that I can immediately think of is a tree called a buckeye that exists probably from Chatham down through Southside, and it doesn't grow here. It's just a totally different area, so we don't have that.
They have them up near Rocky Mountain, Midnight Lake too.
Really? Okay.
I was more
We
asking than saying,
But that's just an example of what we're going to talk about with the differences in biomes as we get into this next week. So we're going to talk about the differences in climate and what climate means. But the climate is a major influence upon the type of vegetation that grows. Now, I made the reference to a buckeye. There's something about our climate, whether it be soils or temperature or what, that enables the buckeye to grow in this eastern region that doesn't here. And for goodness sake, it doesn't grow in the southwest where Dwayne, where Southwest Community College is. So, we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about climate and the differences in things of that type. So, we're about out of time. So, you guys be safe. Have a good weekend, a good holiday, and we'll talk to you about this climate and temperature and things that differentiate biomes when we get back together on Tuesday.
I mean, we're not seeing enough information.
No, the Magic Henry people, they do their own trips at other times. Before the Southside people leave, Caitlin, you had a question, something about our lab trip, something?
I was going to ask you, is everything indoors if they were coming for rain?
Yeah, the email I sent out, part of why we ended up changing the schedule is because of the rain and that kind of stuff. The produce auction is going to be inside, and interesting amount of what you'll be seeing at the high school is going to be inside, but you might be outside a little bit, and that little bit may get worked around rain and that kind of thing.
Okay. And is there any luck estimate?
Let's see. Normally we try to be back by like 3. But I'm trying to see if she said anything about it. No. So I mean, it's probably going to be that you're going to be at the produce auction for, we'll get there at like 10 o'clock a week, y'all. Get there at 10 and then be done at noon and get to high school like 12:30 or whatever, and then be there for an hour, hour and a half, and then the Keysville people will be back on the campus by 2.
We used to have one. Yeah, we used to have one.
That's pretty much the schedule. I guess, John, I can hang up on you so you don't have to do that. So any other questions about the lab?
Colin, Virginia.
Yes.
How far away is that? I'm trying to move a little bit.
I don't know, but since she's talking about meeting in Keysville at 10 and being there by 10:30, it's not, and she's probably figured it's supposed to be meeting in Keysville at 10 and won't be getting out of there until 10:05 or 10, people are. So it's probably only going to be about 20 minutes away. Do any of you in Keysville know where Cullen is?
What?
Oh, where is Cullen? Virginia, the produce auction? Are you familiar with at least a guess about how far away it is from campus?
Oh, no.
This campus or the?
Oh, from that campus.
Okay. If it's an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay, so it's an hour and 15 from this campus, that means it's about 15 from the other.
Where is campus?
It's an hour, it's here to there, pretty close to it.
It's 21 minutes from the Keysville campus, 15 miles.
Okay, 15 miles, 21 minutes. Okay, somebody in Keysville was gonna say something?
Like, is that a town or what?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Cullen is a town, which, somebody just pulled it up on Google Maps here. It's like 15 miles away from the Keysville campus, 21 minutes driving to get there. So that's right, if you meet Dr. Dalton at 10 o'clock in the morning, that's right, you'll be there at 10:30,
That's not too far.
a few minutes before. And there we go, but if you're bored and you want to go to it on your own,
Go behind the workwear building.
you're trying to be there at 10:30.
Yeah.
I'm hungry.
Yes.
Next to us.
Any other questions about that?
See y'all tomorrow.
Okay, see y'all in a couple minutes.
Yeah, well,
Okay, I'm hanging up on y'all now. See you, I'll call back in a minute. Bye.
Oh, yeah.